The principle of internal outmastery, character and choice. The foundational, irreducible truth underpinning all of Covey's work is the principle of internal outmastery. All sustained success, personal, professional, or organizational, originates from the alignment of one's choices with timeless, universal principles, establishing a character of integrity and proactive responsibility. This principle rejects the superficiality of personality ethic and asserts the primacy of the character ethic, where external results are merely the public manifestation of internal governance. This concept is the bedrock of the 7 habits, principle-centered, leadership and the divine center. The entire framework of personal effectiveness is built upon the synthesis of 2 core, inseparable concepts: proactivity, choice, and principle-centeredness, moral law. A. The irreducible truth of proactive choice. The most fundamental truth is the distinction between human beings and all other life forms, the space between stimulus and response. This is the essence of Habit 1. Be proactive, but in the first principle's context, it is the fundamental truth of human freedom. The principle dictates that our ultimate reality is not determined by external conditions, the stimulus, but by our conscious, internal response, the choice. Locus of control. The synthesis introduces the concept of the circle of influence versus the circle of concern. The first principle is that effective living demands the channeling of energy exclusively into the circle of influence. Proactive individuals focus on what they can control, their choices, attitudes, preparation, and skill set, while reactive individuals cede their power to the circle of concern, the weather, other people's faults, past mistakes. The ultimate failure, according to Covey's text, is the voluntary surrender of this unique human gift of choice, leading to a state of victimhood. The proactive individual fundamentally understands that their current state is the accumulated result of past choices, and therefore their future state is entirely dependent upon current, deliberate choice. This includes the ability to choose one's emotional response, to choose one's reaction to adversity, and to choose one's language, shifting from "I can't" to "I choose." Making and keeping commitments. Proactivity is not merely a philosophical concept. It is made tangible through the power of commitment. The first principle of personal integrity is established by the simple, repeated act of making promises to oneself and keeping them. This is the core of Habit 3. Put first things first. Viewed through a first principles lens, Covey's entire body of work argues that before a person can be trusted with leadership over others, they must first master leadership over themselves. The small, private, daily triumphs over inertia and distraction, the execution of what one knows should be done, builds the inner reservoir of self-trust that is the wellspring of all great external accomplishments. The daily disciplines outlined in Daily Reflections and Living the 7 Habits are micro-practices in establishing this inner congruence between value, what one believes, and action, what one does. The courage to execute a personal priority in the face of external pressure is the purest expression of proactive choice and integrity. B. The irreducible truth of principle-centeredness. Proactive choice, unguided, is random motion. It gains power only when anchored to an immutable external reality. This leads to the second major synthesis. Effectiveness is achieved when one's choices align with universal, timeless, and self-evident natural laws, principles. These principles, fairness, honesty, integrity, service, human dignity, excellence, are independent of culture, religion, or personal opinion. The compass versus the map. Covey consistently argues that principles are the compass, while all methods, techniques, and specific habits are merely maps. Maps can become outdated and useless, but the compass, which points to true north, the principles, remains eternally reliable. The first principle, therefore, is one must anchor one's life in principles, not in people, possessions, titles, or pleasure. All forms of primary greatness and principle-centered leadership focus on the profound difference between a life centered on shifting external centers, spouse, money, work, enemies, and a life centered on a rock-solid, internal-external center. The immutable principles. The mission statement as constitutional law, the synthesis of habit. 2. Begin with the end in mind, and the how to develop your personal mission statement guide is the first principle of self-governance by design. The personal mission statement is the individual's constitution, a permanent expression of their ultimate purpose and values, derived from a deep understanding of principles. The act of creation is the ultimate proactive choice, establishing a personal boundary and a criterion against which all future choices, time management, relationship priorities must be measured. First things. First redefines time management not as calendar control, but as value-driven self-management, where the personal mission statement defines the quadrant 2 activities, important but not urgent, that represent one's most important work. The ultimate measure of a choice is, does this decision align with the fundamental design, mission I have chosen for my life? C. The synthesis, the private victory and the character bank, the two synthesized truths, proactive choice and principle-centeredness, culminate in the private victory. Covey posits a linear sequential model of maturity, dependence, independence, interdependence. Internal outmastery is the attainment of independence. The character bank, the accumulation of small, consistent acts of integrity, keeping personal promises, builds the character bank, the personal security and spiritual reserve that allows one to withstand external storms and to lead without resorting to positional authority. This is the foundation of primary greatness, the internal substance of character, which precedes secondary greatness, external success, recognition, fame. The first principle is that secondary greatness without primary greatness is ultimately unsustainable and destructive. A leader who is not congruent, whose public words do not match their private life, will fail because their lack of integrity violates the very principles that hold human systems together. Principle 2. In essence, the principle of internal out mastery dictates that we must first govern ourselves according to timeless principles before we can effectively interact with others or lead systems. It is the establishment of a personal integrity, a seamless unity between character, principle, and daily choice, that forms the non-negotiable prerequisite for all forms of effective living and leadership, discussed in the entire body of work. The principle of mutual value creation, interpersonal and relational law. Having achieved internal out mastery, independence, the individual is prepared for the second, higher-order foundational truth synthesized from Covey's works. The principle of mutual value creation. All high-trust, high-performance relationships and systems are governed by the commitment to seek and generate shared benefit, wherein the process of interaction, communication, is as critical as the final outcome, solution. This principle is the cornerstone of the move from independence to interdependence, governing the relational habits 4, 5, and 6, the third alternative, and the principles of the 7 habits of highly effective marriage families. The entire framework of relational effectiveness is built upon the synthesis of 2 core, inseparable concepts: empathic understanding, process, and synergistic outcome, result. A. The irreducible truth of empathic communication. The primary obstacle to mutual value creation is poor communication, specifically the tendency to project one's own autobiography, assumptions, and intent onto the other person's reality. This is the focus of Habit 5, seek first to understand, then to be understood, but its first principle is far deeper. The prerequisite for influence is understanding. The power of listening. Covey's teaching elevates listening from a courtesy to a therapeutic and structural necessity. The first principle is that you must diagnose before you prescribe. By attempting to understand, one is not merely gathering information, one is creating an emotional climate of safety and respect. Empathic listening, listening with the intent to genuinely understand the other person's point of view, framed within their feeling and their logic, is the relational equivalent of principle-centeredness, Principle 1. It respects the dignity of the other person and validates their reality, regardless of whether one agrees with it. This act of vulnerability and validation deposits into the emotional bank account. The emotional bank account, EBA, the synthesis, reveals the EBA as the irreducible metric of relational health. Every interaction is either a deposit, courtesy, kindness, keeping commitments, apology, or a withdrawal, disrespect, overreaction, ignoring the person. The first principle is that trust is the necessary medium of all high-performance systems, and it is accumulated exclusively through consistent, small deposits into the EBA. Relationships operating from a depleted EBA, low trust, are forced into legalistic, defensive, and expensive forms of interaction, where the process breaks down before the solution can be found. The depth of understanding achieved through Habit 5 determines the size of the next relational deposit, which in turn determines the capacity for synergy. B. The irreducible truth of win-win and synergistic outcome when high trust, EBA, and deep understanding, Habit 5, are present, the relational architecture is ready to achieve the ultimate objective, synergy. This requires a prior commitment to the win-win, Habit 4 philosophy, which is not merely compromise but a deep conviction that a mutually beneficial solution exists and can be achieved. The philosophy of abundance. The foundation of win-win is the abundance mentality, the first principle that life is not a zero-sum game. There is enough success, credit, and resources for everyone. The contrasting scarcity mentality, win-lose, lose-lose, is rooted in Principle 1 failures, insecurity, lack of primary greatness, and is inherently destructive, leading to envy, comparison, and the hoarding of power. The ultimate principle of interdependence is that my success is most effective when it is inextricably linked to your success. The third alternative and creative synergy, Habit 6. Synergy is the ultimate expression of mutual value creation. The first principle is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, but only when the parts, individuals, respect their differences and combine their strengths. Habits 4 and 5. Synergy is not a compromise between two conflicting positions, e.g. my way or your way. It is the creation of a third alternative, a solution that is superior to either original idea. The third alternative elevates this principle into a comprehensive system for conflict resolution and innovation, arguing that the true benefit of diverse perspectives is not merely tolerance, but the creative power unleashed when those differences are combined in a high-trust environment. The ability to realize this third alternative is the ultimate measure of a highly effective relationship or team, where the relational process, listening, respecting differences, itself creates novel, unexpected value. C. The synthesis, the public. Victory and organizational law. The culmination of these two relational truths, empathy and synergy, is the public victory. This is the attainment of interdependence, where effective individuals choose to work with others to achieve outcomes that are impossible alone. Organizational law. In principle-centered leadership and the 7 habits for managers, the principles of mutual value creation become the structural laws of effective organizations. The first principle is that a system's structure must reward win-win interactions. If an organization's compensation system, review process, or resource allocation implicitly rewards a win-lose mentality, e.g., cutting a colleague's budget for personal gain, it is structurally violating the principle of mutual value creation, and trust will inevitably collapse. Effective leadership, therefore, is primarily the work of designing systems that align rewards and accountability with the principles of win-win and synergy. In summary, the principle of mutual value creation dictates that effectiveness moves beyond the self, independence, into the realm of shared contribution, interdependence. The process of achieving this shared value is governed by the law of trust, EBA, which is built by the consistent, empathic act of understanding first and then leveraged by the abundance mentality to creatively generate solutions that benefit all parties involved. The principle of renewal and transcendence, continuous improvement and legacy. The final, synthesized foundational truth across Covey's entire life's work, from the personal focus of Habit 7, sharpen the saw, to the expansive vision of the eighth habit and live life in crescendo, is the principle of renewal and transcendence. Sustained effectiveness, true leadership, and a meaningful life are products of continuous, balanced self-renewal and the alignment of one's work with a transcendent, meaningful purpose that serves humanity. This principle defines a life lived in crescendo, one that continuously builds and whose most important work is always ahead of it. This final framework is built upon the synthesis of two core, inseparable concepts: balanced self-renewal, the means, and purposeful contribution, the end. The irreducible truth of balanced self-renewal. The most insidious threat to long-term effectiveness is erosion through neglect. The entire system of internal and interpersonal mastery, principles 1 and 2, will fail if the fundamental tool, the self, is not systematically maintained and enhanced. This is the ultimate first principle of Habit 7, sharpen the saw. All capital, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, must be renewed periodically to maintain its capacity. The 4 dimensions of renewal. Covey's work consistently breaks down self-renewal into 4 non-negotiable interconnected dimensions. The first principle is that optimal capacity requires symmetrical investment across all 4 dimensions. Neglect in one area, e.g., superb physical health but chronic spiritual deficit, will ultimately compromise the effectiveness of the whole. Physical. Renewing the body through beneficial eating, adequate rest, sleep is a non-negotiable quadrant 2 activity, and regular exercise. This is the capital investment in the instrument that executes all other habits. Mental. Renewing the mind through continuous education, reading, planning, and visualization. This is the investment in learning that allows one to adapt to change and solve complex problems. Spiritual. Renewing one's center through reflection, meditation, connection to nature, or deep communion with one's core principles and mission. This is the investment in integrity and vision that anchors the mission statement. Social emotional. Renewing the connection with others and one's self-esteem through making deposits into the EBA and practicing the habits of public victory. This is the investment in relationships that fuels synergy. The self-perpetuating cycle. Habit 7 is the habit that makes all other habits possible. By increasing the individual's personal capital, it increases their circle of influence, Principle 1, and their capacity for empathic communication and synergy, Principle 2. Renewal is not a luxury. It is the strategic Quadrant 2 activity that prevents the emergency demands of Quadrant 1, crisis, burnout, breakdown. The first principle is that effective time management is predicated on making time for the strategic investment of renewal. B. The irreducible truth of transcendent purpose, the 8th habit. While the first 7 habits move a person from dependence to powerful interdependence, Covey recognized the need for a principle that addressed the profound shifts in the modern, knowledge-based economy. This led to the 8th habit and the principle of finding your voice and inspiring others to find theirs, the call to significance. The synthesis of this final stage is the movement from mere effectiveness, managing things and people, to greatness, inspiring others and serving a purpose higher than self. The first principle is that sustained motivation and true fulfillment are only found when one aligns one's unique talent, voice, with a transcendent need of the world, service. The individual's proactive choice, Principle 1, is now applied to answering the ultimate question: what is the unique contribution only I can make? The leadership mandate. The ultimate purpose of principle-centered leadership is not to manage, but to release the potential and unique voice of every person in the organization. The first principle is that a leader's primary role is to create a culture where others feel safe and inspired to move beyond mere compliance, the body, into contribution, the mind, heart, and spirit. This is the foundation of the leader in me, which applies this principle to education. The ultimate success is a system that inspires greatness and inherent worth in every child. C. The synthesis. legacy, and life in crescendo. The ultimate application of all Covey's principles is the creation of a meaningful legacy. Live Life in Crescendo frames this principle perfectly. The final irreducible truth is that one's most important work is always ahead of them, and a life well lived is characterized by continuous growth and contribution that expands until the very end. Primary greatness, the internal self, Principle 1, combines with public victory, interpersonal contribution, Principle 2, and is sustained by renewal, Principle 3 means, and driven by transcendent purpose, Principle 3 and. This is the integrated flow of a principle-centered life. The final principle is that the truest measure of effectiveness is not the accumulation of wealth or power, but the positive compounding influence one has had on the lives of others, the quality of one's legacy. In conclusion, the principle of renewal and transcendence closes the loop of Covey's philosophy. It provides the necessary fuel, renewal, for the individual's engine, proactivity, to continue driving the system, relationships and organizations, toward a greater, shared purpose. It asserts that true leadership is ultimately about serving and leaving behind a system and a body of work that will continue to create value long after the individual is gone.